Hi, Mystery Writers. Welcome to the Mystery Writers Studio. I'm Zara Altair, and today I wanted to talk about plot holes. What are they, and how do you find them, and what can you do to fix them? If you're new to novel writing, you may wonder what it actually is. You read about them, you learn they must fix them, but you aren't clear what a plot hole is. And I know when I first started writing, it was just a big mystery to me. I was like, okay, so what are they? So essentially, it's part of the story that's left out, and readers are left wondering what happened. In the worst case, that is what a plot hole is, but it's really more than that. It's a logic fail in your storyline, is an inconsistency or a gap that counters the logic of the story's plot. And it does leave the reader wondering, it's like, wait, how did they get from San Francisco to Paris in 4 hours? Things like that. And I know when I was doing script analysis, I was reading a science fiction story that was set way up north on an island north of Canada, and a woman went to the airport to pick people up in a jeep. And I was like, no, you can't go island hopping in a jeep. It just doesn't work that way. So that's the kind of thing I mean by logic error. It has to be logical in the real world. Even if you have an imaginary world, it has to fit within the logic of that world. Um, so, in a mystery, the victim was murdered on a stormy day, and one of the suspects says he was out taking a walk, and yet there's no evidence of mud or moisture or wet clothing or anything else that demonstrates the truth of that statement. So, you need to get that details in, and plot holes occur in the main plot and also in the subplot. So you just don't want to have those gaps of logic in there in this story. Um, the the problem for you is that plot holes take the reader out of the story. They're reading along and they're involved in your story, and all of a sudden they're like, "What? How did that happen?" And they stop being in the story. And you don't want that to happen. You want to keep your readers in the story. You want to keep them turning pages. You don't want them stopping to wonder how something happened. Um, that is a logic fail in your story, because that it just jars them out of the story and makes them also question the entire story, and you definitely don't want that. So how do you spot them? So let's take a look at a few of the ways that you can do this, and this is often in your first run through edits. This is how you find your plot holes. A character's personality suddenly changes. They were one way through this part of the story, and then all of a sudden, for no reason, it's not part of the plot, right? um, a secondary character has an issue or trouble, but it's not resolved in your story. So at the end of the story, the reader is still left wondering what happened to Joe, and you don't want that either. You don't want to leave your reader with unresolved, unanswered questions. All right. Also, there's illogical events. And I mentioned this before. A character flies to France from California and meets a woman in a bar later the same morning. It just can't happen. It can't happen. Um, or a character with financial difficulties wins the lottery. I I know I've talked about twists before and surprises and tricks, and I'm just gonna leave in other sessions, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. You don't want to trick your reader. All right. Another logic fail, especially this can happen in mysteries, is a character forgets an important detail that they actually knew earlier in the story. And when the issue comes up again later in the story, your reader is wondering, well, why doesn't he remember that, the door was yellow or whatever it is that they knew before, and now all of a sudden they seem to have a blank. So those are the kinds of things that can happen in your story as far as logic inconsistencies. So only you know the logic of your story. But because a novel is long, it's hard to spot all those inconsistencies while you're writing. So that's why it's a really good idea to put aside when you go through that first edit. Before you do that, you put your story aside for a couple of weeks, and that helps you read it with fresh eyes, and it helps you read as a reader. So it's easier for you, the writer, to spot things like that. So what can you do while you're doing that? You remain objective. And so you really want to approach this now as a reader, not a writer, all right? And the best practice is putting your manuscript aside and doing the fresh eyes a couple of weeks later. That's going to help you maintain your objectivity. And as you read, make sure that each character is consistent within the story and uniform in character. It's easy to forget what you did with someone 100 pages earlier, so you want to make sure that your characters are consistent throughout this story. And story timeline helps with finding story plot holes as well. Make a list of chapters and major events, and make sure the sequence of events makes sense. The days, the months, the years, or even morning to evening, they all make sense. And your reader isn't going to stop and wonder, wait, I thought it was spring and they had allergies, and now all of a sudden the snow is falling. If the snow is falling, you need to explain why, okay? Um, uh, so the thing is, you may have done an outline before you started writing, but as all of us know as writers, things change while we're writing. So we want to make sure that our story is still consistent after we've actually written the story, and that the real-time details of the story make sense. All right. And then examine your plot. And there's a lot of plotting that goes on with mysteries, as far as hiding clues and bringing the suspects in and all of that thing. So you want to make sure that your plot logic makes sense. Has a journey or question gone unanswered? Has a character made choices or said something that doesn't fit their personality? These are all things that in the fever of writing a specific scene, you get involved and you do that. But then when you read the whole story, it doesn't make sense. And once again, check your subplots and make sure that they all make sense as well. Follow them from beginning to end. I've mentioned Plotter before, and you can outline each subplot in Plotter to make sure that that subplot makes sense as well. And all of the things in the subplot hold true that you do for the main story. You'll also want to keep revision notes as you're revising. Make sure that you don't just delete what you did before. Just make notes about what you did so that you can see what your changes are. And of course, hiring a professional editor is going to help you a lot, because we get very close to our stories, and it's easy to overlook things, and someone with an objective eye can do that. And I've also mentioned before Pro Writing Aid's new critique report, which is an AI function, and it is way totally objective. And you can put your chapters through one at a time to see that they make sense. Excuse me. So, once you discover a plot hole, you have to make a decision about how to fix it. Sometimes it's as simple as deleting a sentence. It's that simple sometimes. Or you replace it with one that makes sense within the story. And you may change the timeline from 3 hours later to the next day or something like that. But sometimes the plot hole is part of the story thread. It's woven into the story, and revisions decisions start getting tough. So here are some ideas for reworking the story to eliminate that story logic failure. So you can rewrite an inconsistency to fit the story. For example, that suspect that says they went for a walk on the rainy day, give them muddy shoes. I mean, some of these things are just really simple. If that's what they really did, then you just need to beef up how you present that character in your story, all right? Also, you want to make the implausible plausible. If a character is acting out of character, rewrite the scene to fit that character with their actions and their speech, so that it fits the overall character portrayal in the story. And this is something that can happen when you're writing scene by scene, which is the best way to write. But sometimes, as I mentioned before, characters say and do things, and they kind of tweak what you had in mind, and all of a sudden you get these inconsistencies. So as you're reading, you want to make sure that your character stays in character. All right. So you can examine the character. It's like, what do they want? What's their goal? What's their plan? Just get right down to the basics of who that character is and their character background. Also, another thing you can do when you find a plot hole is to rethink that thread or rethink the scene. Your first idea is not always the best idea. And so just rethink different ways that you could present that same scene. All right. Another thing to do is go back to your original outline if you outlined the story before you started writing, and look for the place where your story went off track and see if you can bring it back on track with your story. So I think the basic bottom line is when you read your story as a reader, what trips you up? What trips you up? What makes you ask questions, all right? So once you've identified those potholes and considered ways to fix them, rewrite the sections that need change to make your story coherent. That's the whole idea of why you look for plot holes and why you want to fix them, is you want this is an overused word, but a holistic story that makes sense in every part. And story outlines help, character backgrounds help. All of these things help you avoid writing plot holes when you're writing, and as you read, just make sure that you're reading as a reader. This is not, at this point in the game, this is not the time to start fixing grammar and spelling. That's way at the end. way, way at the end. Because if you're going to be taking things out and adding new things, it just slows you down. So don't worry about that now. I know I was talking to an author friend, and she was resisting using the critique feature in Pro Writing Aid because she felt that she had to fix all the grammar before she put it in the critique report. And I said, no, 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 no. You don't need to do that. Yet grammar and spelling, syntax, all that stuff comes way at the end. Pro Writing Aid is going to see the spelling mistakes, but that's not what it's checking right then. It's checking for the coherency of your story. And that's the first check you want to do, and how you get those plot holes before you start doing any other editing, fine tuning the sentences, replacing blah verbs for active action verbs, all those sorts of things that you do. The first thing you want to do is take a look at those plot holes and get them fixed. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions whatsoever, I know I went for a long time wondering what a plot hole was. And if you just think of it as something that doesn't make sense, it's going to help you think about how to look at your story and find those plot holes. All right, thank you so much for being here. Happy Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, and I will see you next week.